We're approaching the end of the session, we hope, and we want to take the opportunity to talk about progress, or as we often see it, too often, lack of progress. So we've just debated the capital budget, and we'll be happy to answer questions you may have about those issues. But I want to make it really clear, first of all, that we believe that the Senate has failed and continues to fail in the most important thing that we had to do before us this year, and that is a fiscal plan. What the Senate proposes as a fiscal plan is not one. It only funds about 75% of our deficit. It leaves us with a $620-some million hole. Deficits in the hundreds of millions will continue for years under the plan. It's not acceptable. It has unallocated cuts. It makes assumptions about revenue that may or may not happen. It accuses the House income tax plan as picking the pockets of Alaskans. Well, they're picking the pocket by drastically capping the PFD and not allowing a vote on the floor to restore it. In reality, the PFD takes the most money from every single Alaskan, only from Alaskans. The income tax falls more on wealthy and the workers who don't even live here. For every 80 cents Alaskans may pay on an income tax, we gain $1 because of the 21% of Alaska's workforce that doesn't live here and doesn't contribute. The income tax vote anticipated for tomorrow doesn't really take the question seriously. There are huge cuts to constitutionally mandated education, and we have tried several times at every opportunity, in fact, to address those. There's nothing left to cut, seriously. There are no serious cuts left that Alaskans are willing to put up with. You know, we've cut state troopers, we've had cuts to health care, we've had cuts to law enforcement, we've had cuts to, I think the hardest one for us is K-12, but the university is being systematically destroyed. Pre-K is basically gone. There's nothing left to cut that allows us to have the kind of community that Alaskans want. So tomorrow you'll see a show vote on income taxes, and our biggest goal here is to have us on a stable fiscal plan to address the uncertainty that impairs development and investment in the state of Alaska. That requires broad-based tax, new revenue. It requires some use of the permanent fund earnings or money from the oil companies. I mean, those are really the three choices. We have new revenue, broad-based taxes, permanent fund money, or oil industry money. Those are our choices. And with that, we are open for questions. Did anybody here want to make a statement? No? Okay, any questions?
James Brooks from the Juneau Empire. Wanted to ask about amendment number 4 that was transferring money from AGDC to various things across the state. Do you all believe the gas pipeline is now dead, or what's the thoughts behind that vote?
You want to take that? No?
I think my understanding is there's $100 million in the LNG fund still. Personally, I wouldn't say it's dead. I think the studies, the research that I've seen from Wood Mackenzie, for example, shows you actually can make this project doable, but it's a very, very small margin of error. And there's still money left in the fund to continue the project. Personally, I think it is worth continuing. If for nothing else, then it is enormous amount of jobs that it would create. It would provide low-cost gas for Alaskans if you're able to bring a big backbone down the center of Alaska. And it has the potential to bring a huge amount of revenue to the state, billions to the state. So I think it is worth keeping there. And I know people are concerned because of the price of gas, and I think that's a fair concern. But just remember, a few years ago, the price of gas in Japan and the Asian market spot price was $15, $20 per 1,000 cubic feet. Our project, the way it was currently structured, was profitable at around $12 per 1,000 cubic feet. Prices have dropped in the Asian market to, I think, $7, $8, maybe even a little bit less. So people have a tendency to look what's the market look like right now? But the question really is, what does the market look like in 20, 30, 40 years when we would be actually delivering gas? So I think it is worth keeping around. There is still, my understanding, sufficient funds to do that. And so I'm still hopeful.
And I think that globally, as gas prices stay low, it's anticipated that demand will continue to grow and at some point reach a balance. And we're looking forward to that in the mid 2020s. Any other questions?
Wanted to ask about Juneau Access funding, still in the budget for that. We've seen reappropriations on other things. What were your thoughts on not reappropriating that money? I mean, the governor has said he doesn't want to do it, and I would like to ask Senator Egan to talk about Juneau Access, what you feel like the role of the Senate is on that coming forward.
Well, James, I've always been for Juneau Access. I mean, I look at it like we've talked about before. I look at it as access into Juneau, not access out of Juneau. And I didn't personally lobby to keep that money in. I just want to make it very clear. I talked to a few folks, but it wasn't aggressive lobbying on my part. Personally, I'm happy that the money's still in there.
Okay, so one other thing.
Wait, Nat has a question.
Go ahead, Nat.
Thanks, Nat Hurst with Alaska Dispatch News. What is your guys' understanding? Does the $25 million from the pipeline fund that's going to the Public Education Trust Fund, does that actually offset some of the 5.7% reduction to foundation formula spending for this coming year, or does it not do that?
Senator Begich?
I'll take that one, Nat. It doesn't have any. It has no relationship whatsoever to it. It's just simply a deposit into the trust fund. It's not to offset anything. It's money that goes into that trust fund, just to continue to accrue capital into the trust fund. And actually, in terms of public policy, we ought to consider that trust fund as something that is usable. There are a number of pieces of legislation out there that. One by Representative Parrish, I believe. Certainly in SB 96, there's also some language that reflects on actually increasing the market, how the percent of market value use of that fund in an appropriate, sustainable way that could double the amount of money that then would be used or available for education. But that in and of itself was not designed to do that. I think it basically took a $50 million removal from that fund and made it more palatable to people. That was essentially all operating budget decisions that were being made there. So it also belies a bigger issue here, which is the debate of whether we should or shouldn't have been talking about the operating budget today on the capital budget vote. The fact of the matter is, it's all the same thing there. It's loosey-goosey when it comes to how they're addressing these budget issues. And I think the bigger issue here isn't the $50 million that was removed from that particular fund, but more and I'm surprised we haven't heard a question about the $288 million removed and basically zeroing out the statutory budget reserve, to basically transfer that payment to the oil industry. That happened today. That was in that bill. And that ought to concern everybody in the state of Alaska, in particular, ought to concern all of you, that was the choice made by this majority, was to essentially say that the oil and gas companies are more important than any education issue out there or any other of these issues where cuts have been made. And I think that's what that does say. So I hope that we'll focus a little on that as well. But in terms of the 25, thank you, Senator Dunleavy, for putting money in to the trust fund. Let's put another, we could have put $200 million into the trust fund and funded, if you're going to drain the statutory budget reserve, you could have put $200 million into the public schools trust fund and still made whole the education budget and had money left over.
How do you feel that it's accurate though to say that I mean, it's not like there's zero money that's going to education. There's 1-point-something billion that's going to education.
1.2 billion to education, 1.3.5 billion that is owed in oil tax credits. There are different amounts of money, and everyone has to get, as we've been told time and again, their fair share. Everyone has to give their piece of the pie, but not the industry, apparently. Only the Alaskans do. $69 million in cuts It's the way you look at this is what is the damage of the actual action they're taking. $69 million in cuts. We know that 5% cuts over 280 employees in Anchorage. It's tens and tens of employees in Fairbanks. I have the numbers here somewhere, but it's dozens of cuts. It's hundreds of people being cut when it comes to these school districts. The impact is larger class size. The impact is uncertainty for Alaskan parents, students, and for teachers. It means that we're going to have turnover at a higher rate. $20,000 is what the majority has told us is the cost of turnover for teachers. That's and juxtaposing that against taking that $288 million and giving it to the oil industry.
Well, I guess I'll just come back one more time and say, I mean, the cash subsidy payments have been sharply reduced by the governor in the past couple of years. I mean, what in your guys' mind is the appropriate amount to be paying in subsidies this year?
You want to take that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the payment of oil tax credits is discretionary. If you look at the statute is says the legislature may appropriate, and it sets a recommended percentage, and it says 10% if oil's above $60 a barrel, and 15% if it's below of your production tax that you collect. And this amount this year was $74 million. The Senate included that $74 million in the operating budget. They're now going above and beyond that. And so now they're saying, well, we've got to make it up. And by the way, as I mentioned on the floor, the appropriation is discretionary into the oil and gas tax credit fund, but then the payment is also discretionary because it says the director may refund these tax credit certificates. So this is a completely discretionary fund. And when you compare, and they're saying, well, we've got to fund it because the governor vetoed this and they're suffering, and the comparison between how they're treating that and how they're treating the permanent fund couldn't be more stark, couldn't be more clear. And because you have really identical situations, except the permanent fund is actually a shall statute, and under the permanent fund statute, it says the permanent fund corporation shall transfer these funds. It's always been transferred for decades, and so you have this juxtaposition where we're saying where the majority is saying to the people of Alaska, when a governor vetoes oil tax credits, which are purely discretionary, we will drain our entire savings and give every penny that we can to them. Whereas for the people of Alaska, we're not only going to not pay you last year, we're going to cut this year's also. And I think people are going to find that offensive. I think people are going to be extremely, extremely upset when they find that out, how they're being treated.
All right, Cale Green with KTVA. Question from the station. Will anyone in the majority vote for an income tax? If not, how do you resolve the budget differences?
I anticipate that nobody from the majority will vote for the income tax on the Senate side. And I think that it'll have to be resolved in a special session. The governor has said he will call us back until we have broad-based taxes passed. And as I said before, the only other options are to take the permanent fund earnings, which we're already doing to some extent, and to go to the oil industry. So I think that broad-based taxes have to be part of the picture, and the governor will call us back until we get it right. Anybody else?
I would add something to that if that's okay. I just, I've read in the paper this morning that somehow it represents political courage for the Senate majority to put the income tax on the floor. Political courage is actually voting for something that you think might have that might not be supported by the people that would reelect you, but you know that it's the right thing to do. Political courage means actually doing something that is a risk to you. And I think everyone here has at one time or another actually exhibited political courage in supporting the kinds of things that might not make us popular at home, but are necessary for the long-term future. Fundamentally, the Senate majority is going to have to come to terms with this is not they always use the phrase kick the can down the road. That's what all this is about. You have to stop doing it. You need to have a 20-year plan that reaches into the future, a sustainable plan, so that Alaskans have certainty. So Alaskans are shown the respect that we apparently show the oil industry here, that we actually do the job and show the courage that we need to do to take tough votes. That's what the House did. The House majority had the courage to take votes that many of them knew would put them at political risk. That's what political courage is about. And that's not what's happening in the Senate majority today. And I know we're going to be back here. Senator Gardner's correct.
And what we want to make sure is that the state of Alaska gets it right, and we don't have to come back year after year after year with these dragged out sessions and a lack of certainty for any industry in this state. Without conquering that, people don't get loans. People don't want to buy new houses. People don't want to stay here. They have to know that next year their school's open. Next year their kid's teacher comes back. Next year there's enough money for law enforcement. Next year there's enough money for the courts to operate properly. Next year and the year after, we have our economy in hand and we are moving forward. That's our goal. All right. Thank you very much.